May 2008, rural Minnesota. A 19-year-old college student is driving home after spending the evening with friends. The roads are empty. The farmland stretches for miles in every direction. Shortly before 2 a.m., his car slides into a ditch. He calls his parents. He tells them he's not hurt. He says he can see lights in the distance and will walk toward town. For the next 47 minutes, he stays on the phone with his father, describing gravel roads, fields, and fences in the dark. Then, suddenly, 3 words. "Oh shit." There is a sound, then silence. The line remains open, but he never speaks again. How does someone disappear while still on the phone? This is the true crime case of Brandon Swanson. Brandon Victor Swanson was 19 years old in May of 2008. He lived with his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, in Marshall, Minnesota, a small city of roughly 13,000 residents in the southwestern part of the state. Marshall is surrounded by farmland, long, open fields broken up by county roads, drainage ditches, and scattered farmsteads. It is a place where most people know each other, where high school sports and local colleges shape the rhythm of the community, and where late-night traffic outside town is rare. At the time of his disappearance, Brandon had just completed his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, Minnesota. He was enrolled in the wind energy program, a relatively new and growing field. Friends described him as social and outgoing. He maintained regular contact with his parents and did not have a history of running away, disappearing, or cutting off communication. There were no documented behavioral concerns in the weeks leading up to May 14, 2008. The evening of May 13th marked the end of the academic year. Brandon spent the night with friends. It was not an unusual celebration. No major party, no reported altercation, no incident that later drew investigative attention. There were no emergency calls from the gathering. No witness later reported a fight or confrontation. By all available accounts, it was an ordinary social evening for a college student at the close of a semester. Shortly after midnight, Brandon left to drive home to Marshall. The distance between Canby and Marshall is roughly 30 miles, depending on the route taken. The area between those towns is rural and sparsely populated. County roads stretch in straight lines across flat agricultural land. Many of them are gravel. In the dark, they offer few visual reference points. Street lighting outside town limits is minimal. Intersections can look identical. In some areas, small towns sit several miles apart, marked only by distant clusters of lights. Driving conditions that night were not reported as severe. There were no official weather alerts for storms or heavy precipitation in the region. However, rural roads at night can still present challenges. Uneven shoulders, soft gravel, and narrow lanes bordered by drainage ditches designed to manage runoff from surrounding fields. At approximately 1:54 a.m. on May 14, 2008, Brandon called his father, Brian Swanson. He reported that he had driven into a ditch. He said he was not injured. He believed he was near the town of Lind, Minnesota, and told his father he could see the lights of what he thought was a nearby town in the distance. His tone, according to later statements, did not indicate panic. He did not report that another vehicle had forced him off the road. He did not say he had collided with anything. The assumption at that moment was straightforward. A young driver had misjudged a turn on a rural road and slid into a ditch. That kind of incident is not uncommon in agricultural areas where shoulders can be soft and roads narrow. Brian Swanson got into his vehicle and began driving to locate his son. Meanwhile, Brandon exited his car. He believed he was close enough to walk toward visible lights. He remained on the phone with his father as he began moving on foot. The call continued as Brian drove through the area Brandon believed he was in. They attempted to coordinate their locations verbally. Brandon described gravel roads, fields, and fences. He indicated that he was walking along what he thought would lead him toward town. What neither of them realized at that time was that Brandon was not near Lind. Subsequent investigation would determine that his car was located near Taunton, Minnesota, approximately 25 miles away from where he believed he was. In the dark, with few landmarks and repetitive road grids, he had misidentified his location. The farmland between Taunton and surrounding towns consists of open fields, drainage ditches, and occasional waterways, including the Yellow Medicine River and its tributaries. At night, these features can be difficult to detect without artificial lighting. Gravel roads intersect at right angles across the landscape. Many look nearly identical. During the phone call, Brandon continued walking. His father attempted to locate him by driving the roads near Lind, unaware that he was searching in the wrong area. At several points, they believed they were near one another, but they never connected visually. Brandon's descriptions did not match what his father was seeing, though neither initially understood why. The call lasted approximately 47 minutes. Throughout that time, there was no indication that Brandon was engaged in a confrontation with another person. He did not report seeing a vehicle approach him. He did not describe encountering anyone. He continued speaking with his father as he walked. Then suddenly, Brandon said, "Oh shit." According to his father's account, there was a sound immediately after, often described as a possible exclamation or reaction, and then silence. The line remained connected for a short period, but Brandon did not respond when his father called his name. Eventually, the call disconnected. There was no further contact from Brandon Swanson after that moment. At the time, however, the full scope of the situation was not yet clear. A father had been speaking to his son minutes earlier. A vehicle had gone into a ditch without serious damage. A young man had been walking toward what he believed was a nearby town. Nothing in the early hours of May 14th immediately signaled that this would become one of Minnesota's most enduring cold cases. The focus remained on finding him quickly. His parents continued searching. Law enforcement would soon become involved. But in those first hours, the circumstances still appeared recoverable. A stranded college student somewhere in the dark, not yet a missing person, whose disappearance would remain unresolved years later. What began as a routine drive home after a semester-ending gathering had shifted into uncertainty within less than an hour. The rural landscape that had framed Brandon's upbringing, the open fields, the quiet roads, the distant lights of small towns, would now become central to understanding how a 19-year-old could vanish within walking distance of his own vehicle. At this stage, there were no confirmed signs of violence, no reported struggle, no evidence of a second vehicle at the scene of the car's discovery, just an abandoned Chevrolet Lumina in a ditch, a disconnected phone call, and a young man who had last been heard speaking calmly to his father in the early hours of a Minnesota morning. Shortly before 2 o'clock in the morning, on May 14th, 2008, Brandon Swanson's car left the roadway and came to rest in a ditch in rural western Minnesota. The area was agricultural land, flat, open, and sparsely populated. Gravel roads intersected at regular intervals, bordered by drainage ditches designed to channel runoff from surrounding fields. At night, these roads can be difficult to distinguish from one another. Without clear landmarks, orientation becomes largely dependent on memory and assumption. The vehicle Brandon was driving, a Chevrolet Lumina, did not collide with another car. There were no reports of skid marks indicating evasive maneuvers involving traffic. When it was later located, there was no visible evidence of major impact damage. The car had not rolled. It had not struck a tree or a fence post. It appeared to have slipped off the road and settled into the ditch without catastrophic force. At approximately 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his father, Brandon Swanson. He reported that he had gone off the road. He told his father he was not injured. There was no mention of another vehicle, no report of someone forcing him off the road. His tone, according to later accounts from his parents, did not suggest panic or distress beyond the inconvenience of being stuck. He believed he was near the town of Lind, Minnesota. From his perspective, he could see lights in the distance and assumed they belonged to Lind. In rural Minnesota, clusters of town lights can appear similar from miles away. With limited signage visible in darkness, it is possible to misjudge position by several miles without realizing it. Brandon Swanson began driving immediately after receiving the call. The plan was straightforward. Brandon would remain on the phone while his father navigated toward him. They would meet on the road, and the car could be retrieved later. At that moment, the situation did not present itself as dangerous. A young driver had gone into a ditch, something that happens regularly on unlit rural roads, and was waiting for assistance. Brandon decided not to stay inside the vehicle. He told his father he would begin walking toward the lights he believed marked the nearby town. He left the car behind and started moving along the gravel road. His father remained on the phone with him. The assumption guiding both of them was clear. He was close to Lind. That assumption would later prove incorrect. When the car was eventually located, it was found near Taunton, Minnesota, approximately 25 miles from Lind. The misidentification of location meant that Brian was searching in the wrong area, while Brandon was walking in a different part of the rural grid. The farmland around Taunton consists of open fields, intersecting gravel roads and drainage systems that include ditches and small waterways. In daylight, visibility across fields can stretch for long distances. At night, however, the landscape flattens into darkness. Road edges blend into field boundaries. A person walking without artificial lighting can misjudge terrain. During the call, Brandon described fences and gravel roads. His father attempted to triangulate his position based on those descriptions. But in agricultural areas, such features repeat every few miles. A fence line does not indicate a specific location. A gravel intersection is not unique. Without GPS tracking, limited in 2008 cellular systems, precise location data was unavailable. There were no early signs of criminal interference at the car site. When authorities later examined the vehicle, there was no evidence suggesting a struggle had taken place inside it. No shattered windows, no blood visible in the immediate inspection. The car's condition did not immediately indicate violence. The more significant issue was geography. Brandon believed he was near Lind. His father searched near Lind. Meanwhile, the car sat near Taunton. That discrepancy meant that, for a crucial period of time, efforts were divided between two separate rural areas. As the minutes passed, Brandon continued walking. His father drove, scanning the roads. At multiple points during the conversation, they believed they might be close to one another. They were not. The miscalculation of location would later become one of the central elements of the case. It was not the result of deception. It was not based on false information intentionally provided. It stemmed from visual assumptions made in darkness on rural roads that offer few distinguishing landmarks. From the outside, the situation still appeared manageable. The car was intact. Brandon was mobile and communicating. His father was actively searching. There was no report of injury, no mention of another person, and no immediate evidence of threat. But the longer the call continued without a successful meeting, the more the gap between assumed and actual location widened. The farmland between Taunton and neighboring towns is expansive. Walking along those roads at night can lead across culverts, uneven terrain, and unmarked field entrances. When the call ultimately ended abruptly later that night, the focus would shift from vehicle recovery to search and rescue. But in these early moments, when the car sat quietly in a ditch and a father drove through the dark, the situation still seemed recoverable. The ditch itself did not suggest catastrophe. The vehicle's condition did not indicate high-speed impact. There were no skid marks publicly documented that implied a violent maneuver. The event, as first described, was consistent with a simple off-road slide on a rural stretch of highway. It was the mistaken belief about location, Lind instead of Taunton, that quietly transformed a minor roadside incident into the starting point of a prolonged disappearance. At 1:54 a.m., it was a call about a car in a ditch. Within hours, it would become the beginning of a missing persons case that remains unresolved. After leaving his car in the ditch, Brandon Swanson remained on the phone with his father. What followed was not a brief update or a quick request for help. The call continued for nearly 47 minutes. It would become the most significant documented sequence in the case, the final confirmed contact before his disappearance. Brian Swanson was driving through rural roads near Lind, believing his son was somewhere nearby. Brandon, meanwhile, was walking along gravel roads under the assumption that he was close to that same town. Neither understood that they were separated by roughly 25 miles. During the call, Brandon described what he was seeing as he walked. He mentioned fields on both sides of the road. He spoke about fences he had to climb or navigate around. He described gravel underfoot and the absence of clear signage. There were no streetlights. No passing vehicles were reported during the conversation. The landscape he described was consistent with western Minnesota farmland, flat, open, segmented by property lines and drainage systems. Several times, father and son believed they might be near each other. Brandon would say he saw lights in the distance. Brian would drive toward visible lights from his own vantage point, attempting to close the distance. But when they tried to locate one another visually, nothing aligned. Each believed the other was close. Each assumed the other could see the same surroundings. In reality, they were searching in entirely different grids of roads. Brandon continued moving on foot. At times, he reportedly cut across fields rather than staying strictly on the road. Agricultural land in that region often includes uneven terrain, shallow ravines, and drainage ditches that may not be obvious at night. The Yellow Medicine River and smaller tributaries run through portions of Lincoln County, including areas near Taunton. In darkness, waterways can blend into the surrounding landscape. The conversation remained steady. There were no reported arguments, no indication that Brandon had encountered another person. He did not report hearing approaching vehicles. He did not describe being followed. The tone, according to later statements from his father, remained calm. At certain points, Brandon told his father he could see what he believed were town lights. Brian attempted to orient himself toward those same lights, but distance perception in rural areas can be misleading. A farmhouse several miles away can appear similar to a small town cluster when viewed at night. Time passed. Brian drove through roads near Lind. Brandon walked through fields near Taunton. They did not realize that their assumptions were wrong. Then, without warning, the call changed. Brandon suddenly said, "Oh shit." According to Brandon Swanson's account, the exclamation was immediate and sharp. It was not preceded by an explanation. There was no buildup in the conversation suggesting imminent danger. The phrase was followed by what has been described as a sound, possibly the noise of a footstep, impact, or environmental disturbance, but no clear description was ever confirmed publicly. After that, silence. Brian called out to his son. There was no response. The line remained connected for a short time. It did not immediately disconnect. That detail is significant. The phone did not instantly power off. It remained active, but Brandon did not speak again. Eventually, the call ended. Whether due to battery depletion, signal loss, or manual disconnection has never been publicly confirmed. That moment, those final 3 words, became the last verified communication from Brandon Swanson. There was no follow-up text message, no second call, no voicemail, no subsequent digital trace suggesting continued activity on his phone after that point. For investigators, the 47-minute call became central. It established that Brandon was alive and mobile for a significant period after leaving his vehicle. It indicated he was navigating terrain consistent with farmland. It confirmed that he believed he was near Lind, and it captured the exact moment the situation shifted from a roadside inconvenience to something unknown. The difficulty lies in interpretation. "Oh shit" is a phrase that can indicate many things. It can signal a misstep, a stumble, a sudden obstacle. It can reflect surprise at an animal in the path, a sudden drop in terrain, or an unexpected barrier. It can also signal confrontation or threat. Without additional audio evidence, the phrase alone does not define what happened. No public record confirms screams, prolonged struggle, or clear sounds of violence on the call. The abrupt silence is documented, but the nature of what caused it remains undetermined. When authorities later examined the call data, they were able to identify general cell tower usage but not an exact GPS coordinate. In 2008, real-time precise mobile tracking was limited. That technological limitation significantly restricted the ability to narrow down his final walking location based on call logs alone. The 47-minute call stands as the last concrete, time-stamped interaction. It confirms movement. It confirms orientation attempts. It confirms mislocation. And it confirms a sudden, unexplained interruption. There were no witnesses who reported seeing Brandon walking that night. No motorists came forward to state they had encountered him. No landowners reported a disturbance consistent with a confrontation. Despite search efforts in the days that followed, no items of clothing, personal belongings, or physical evidence were located in the immediate search areas tied directly to that call. From a factual standpoint, the phone conversation ends without resolution. It does not include a confession, a threat, or a definitive clue. It provides only a narrow window into his final known movements. A young man walking through farmland, a father driving through the wrong rural grid. 47 minutes of coordination that never converged. 3 words, then silence. When Brandon Swanson stopped responding during the early morning hours of May 14th, 2008, the situation shifted immediately from roadside assistance to emergency search. Brandon Swanson continued driving, attempting to retrace the areas where he believed his son had been walking. For a period of time, the search focused near Lind, Minnesota, the location Brandon had repeatedly referenced during the call. At that stage, neither Brian nor responding authorities understood that the vehicle was not near Lind at all. Later that morning, Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina was located in a ditch near Taunton, Minnesota, in Lincoln County. The discovery of the car established a critical fact. Brandon had been mistaken about his location. He was not walking near Lind. He had been miles away, in a different rural grid entirely. The vehicle itself did not indicate violence. It had not rolled over. It showed no significant collision damage. There were no signs of forced entry. There was no visible blood at the scene. The interior did not present immediate evidence of a struggle. The car appeared consistent with a vehicle that had slid off a gravel road and settled into a ditch. This realization redirected search efforts, but it also confirmed that several initial hours had been spent focusing on the wrong region. The terrain around Taunton consists of wide agricultural fields broken up by drainage ditches, gravel roads, and waterways. One of the primary geographic features in the area is the Yellow Medicine River, which runs through parts of Lincoln County. Smaller tributaries, culverts, and irrigation channels branch off from it. In daylight, these features are visible across open land. At night, they can blend into the surrounding terrain. Search efforts expanded quickly. Law enforcement agencies coordinated with local volunteers. Foot searches began in areas surrounding the vehicle's location. Fields were walked systematically. Road edges were examined. Ditches were inspected for signs of disturbance. Spurhunde, tracking dogs, were deployed to attempt to follow Brandon's scent. According to available reports, dogs tracked a scent from the vehicle area toward nearby gravel roads and fields. However, scent tracking in agricultural areas can be complicated. Open farmland offers limited scent containment. Wind conditions can disperse trails quickly. Multiple intersecting paths and animal movement can further disrupt tracking. Helicopters were also used to scan large sections of farmland from the air. Aerial searches focused on riverbanks, tree lines, and uneven terrain where a person might fall or become obscured from ground view. Agricultural land in that region includes stretches of tall grass and crop fields that, depending on planting stage, can conceal ground-level objects. Despite these efforts, no confirmed physical trace of Brandon was found in the immediate search radius. Investigators checked nearby farm buildings and outbuildings. They contacted landowners in the surrounding area. There were no verified reports of someone matching Brandon's description, knocking on doors, or seeking assistance during the early hours of May 14th. The absence of physical evidence became increasingly significant. No clothing items were located. No personal belongings were found in open fields. No blood was discovered along road edges or near drainage systems. There were no confirmed footprints that could be tied directly to him in a way that established a clear direction of travel. Search teams returned to the area multiple times over subsequent days. Fields were re-examined. Riverbanks were checked again. Portions of the Yellow Medicine River and nearby waterways were assessed for possible drowning scenarios. However, no body was located. One of the most consequential factors in the case was the time lost due to the initial misidentification of Brandon's location. During the early part of the phone call, his father had been driving through roads near Lind, based on Brandon's belief that he was in that area. By the time authorities established that the car was near Taunton, several hours had passed. In missing person cases, early search windows are often critical. Environmental exposure, injury, or water hazards can significantly affect survival in rural terrain. The delay in concentrating efforts near the correct area meant that any immediate opportunity to locate Brandon during those first hours had passed. Law enforcement examined the vehicle carefully. The keys were not reported to be in the ignition. There was no public documentation indicating forced entry into the car after it had been left. The positioning of the vehicle was consistent with an accidental slide rather than a high-speed crash. Investigators also considered the possibility that Brandon may have fallen into a drainage ditch or waterway after leaving the road. In agricultural regions, ditches can vary in depth and may contain water depending on seasonal conditions. Some sections may be dry, others may hold standing water. Visibility at night can be limited, particularly if the ground slopes unexpectedly. Still, no conclusive evidence supported any single theory. There were no eyewitness reports placing him with another individual. There was no confirmed sign of abduction. There was no discovered scene indicating violence. The search expanded beyond the immediate perimeter of the vehicle site. Authorities evaluated broader grids of rural roads to account for possible extended walking distance during the 47-minute call. But the longer the search continued without physical evidence, the more uncertain the case became. What remained clear was this: Brandon had left his vehicle voluntarily. He had been alive and speaking during the extended phone call. He had been walking in farmland terrain. And then, within seconds, communication ended. The farmland around Taunton returned to its normal quiet after the search teams left each day. Crops continued to grow. Roads remained sparsely traveled at night. But somewhere within that landscape, something had interrupted a 19-year-old's walk toward what he believed was safety. The misdirection between Lind and Taunton did not create the disappearance, but it altered the early search trajectory in a way that may have affected the outcome. From that point forward, every search effort would operate under one persistent reality. There were no confirmed physical traces to follow. An abandoned car in a ditch, acres of farmland, waterways running quietly through Lincoln County, and no confirmed sign of where Brandon Swanson went after those final words. In the hours and days following Brandon Swanson's disappearance, investigators faced a central challenge. The case depended heavily on a phone call, yet the technology available in 2008 offered only limited precision in determining where that call had taken place. At the time, consumer cell phones did not routinely provide real-time GPS tracking data to law enforcement. While GPS capabilities existed in certain devices, they were not universally active, and location services were not integrated into emergency response systems the way they are today. Investigators instead relied on cell tower data, specifically the towers that handled the connection during Brandon's 47-minute call. Cell tower analysis can establish a general coverage area, but it does not provide exact coordinates. Rural towers cover wide geographic ranges. A single tower may service multiple miles of farmland. In Brandon's case, tower data helped confirm that he was not near Lind, as he had believed. It pointed instead toward an area near Taunton, but that still left a large radius of land to search. Without GPS pings or precise triangulation data, investigators could not narrow his last known walking position to a specific road, culvert, or field boundary. The call confirmed movement, but not direction. It established duration, but not endpoint. Phone battery life also became a question. There was no confirmed public record detailing how much charge remained at the moment the call ended. Whether the phone lost signal due to terrain, ran out of battery, or was physically damaged has never been conclusively established. In 2008, many phones did not automatically transmit final location coordinates when power was lost. Beyond telecommunications data, investigators examined financial activity. There were no suspicious bank transactions in the immediate period following his disappearance. No evidence of large withdrawals, no unusual charges, no indication that he accessed funds after the phone call ended. There was also no documentation suggesting that Brandon had planned to leave voluntarily. He had personal belongings at home. He had ongoing studies. He maintained regular contact with his family. There was no known history of threats, disputes, or escalating conflict in his personal life. Friends were interviewed. No reports indicated that he had expressed intent to disappear. There were no statements from peers suggesting that he was under unusual stress or involved in criminal activity. He did not have a known criminal record. There was no documented involvement in violent incidents or illicit enterprises. Investigators also evaluated the possibility of foul play. However, there were no confirmed reports of suspicious vehicles in the immediate area at the time of the call. No eyewitnesses placed another person with him. No physical evidence suggested an abduction scene near the vehicle. Without blood, signs of struggle, or abandoned personal effects, the case lacked forensic anchors. In rural environments, technology limitations can compound uncertainty. Unlike urban areas, which may have dense surveillance coverage, the farmland near Taunton had no extensive camera systems in 2008. There were no traffic cameras capturing his route, no convenience store footage near the crash site. The absence of surveillance meant investigators could not reconstruct his movements visually. Search operations relied heavily on ground sweeps and physical inspection. But without precise digital coordinates, those searches had to cover large areas methodically. Agricultural terrain changes seasonally. Crops grow, are harvested, and regrow. Drainage patterns shift. Visibility differs dramatically between spring and late summer. Over time, environmental conditions can obscure traces that might otherwise have been found. Authorities revisited the area multiple times in subsequent years. Improved search techniques, including sonar technology for waterways, were applied. Yet the core limitation remained. There was no confirmed endpoint to his path after the call. From a technological standpoint, the case highlights a transitional era. Mobile communication was widespread in 2008, but the forensic tools associated with smartphones had not yet fully developed. There were no app-based location histories to analyze, no cloud backups containing embedded GPS metadata, no automated geofence warrants available. The available evidence established only a framework. He called at 1:54 a.m. He remained on the phone for approximately 47 minutes. He was walking. He believed he was near Lind. Cell tower data later suggested he was near Taunton. The call ended abruptly. Beyond that framework, technology offered no additional precision. The absence of financial movement, the lack of documented conflict, and the absence of criminal background did not eliminate possibilities, but they did narrow investigative focus. There was no immediate sign of voluntary flight, no digital trail suggesting a prearranged meeting, no online activity indicating coordination with another individual that night. Investigators were left with a final phone call, a vehicle in a ditch, and a broad rural search area. In many modern cases, a smartphone's GPS history can pinpoint exact walking routes down to the meter. In 2008, that level of detail was not available. The difference between a specific drainage culvert and an open field miles away could not be determined digitally. As days turned into weeks, the case shifted from urgent search to long-term investigation. But the evidence profile did not expand. There were no new digital revelations, no financial anomalies, no confirmed sightings. The tools available at the time had defined the limits of certainty, and within those limits, the trail ended in open farmland. In the immediate aftermath of Brandon Swanson's disappearance, the search did not end when the first organized efforts concluded. Law enforcement agencies, local volunteers, family members, and state investigators continued to return to the rural area near Taunton, Minnesota in the weeks and months that followed. The farmland that had been walked in grid patterns during the initial response was revisited. Drainage ditches were checked again, tree lines were scanned, sections of the Yellow Medicine River and nearby waterways were examined with the understanding that seasonal conditions might alter visibility. Agricultural land changes over time. Crops grow taller as summer advances. Fields are harvested and replanted. Heavy rains reshape ditches and low-lying areas. Because of these changes, search efforts were not limited to a single pass through the terrain. Authorities conducted follow-up searches during different seasons in hopes that altered ground conditions might reveal something that had previously been concealed. Despite those repeated efforts, no confirmed physical evidence was recovered. No clothing tied directly to Brandon was found in the documented search areas. No personal effects were discovered along the gravel roads near the vehicle site. No remains were identified in nearby waterways. The absence of discovery did not confirm any specific theory. It simply reinforced the fact that the case lacked a definable endpoint. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension continues to list Brandon Swanson as a missing person. The case remains open. There has been no official declaration of death. There has been no arrest. No suspect has been publicly named. No forensic evidence has emerged linking a specific individual to his disappearance. In the years following 2008, search technology improved. Sonar equipment used in water searches became more advanced. Digital mapping tools allowed investigators to create more detailed grid overlays of search areas. Volunteers organized additional coordinated searches with updated equipment. Still, none of these efforts produced conclusive findings tied directly to Brandon's whereabouts. The continued lack of evidence has defined the structure of the investigation. Without remains, there is no autopsy. Without a confirmed scene of violence, there is no forensic reconstruction of an attack. Without confirmed eyewitness accounts placing Brandon with another person, there is no narrative of confrontation supported by testimony. What exists instead is a documented timeline that ends with a phone call. At approximately 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his father. For nearly 47 minutes, he remained on the line. He described his surroundings. He attempted to orient himself toward what he believed were town lights. Then he said, "Oh shit," and the call ended. Everything beyond that moment is unknown. The legislative response that followed is one of the few concrete developments tied to his case. In 2009, Minnesota enacted what is commonly referred to as Brandon's Law. The statute requires law enforcement agencies to take immediate action on missing person reports and eliminates any informal waiting period that might previously have delayed investigation. The law reflects a recognition that early hours in a disappearance can be critical. Before this change, families sometimes encountered resistance when reporting an adult missing, particularly if the person was over 18 and not immediately believed to be in danger. Brandon's case underscored how quickly uncertainty can escalate in rural environments. The law does not resolve his disappearance, but it altered procedural response for future cases across the state. The practical impact of the law is measurable. Law enforcement must document reports immediately and begin investigative steps without delay. It stands as a structural response to a case that otherwise remains unresolved. Over time, Brandon's disappearance has remained in public records, missing person databases, and law enforcement bulletins. His information is listed in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. It remains accessible through state and federal channels. Periodically, renewed media attention has prompted additional volunteer searches or awareness campaigns. Yet none of those efforts have produced verified new evidence. The case occupies a particular space in missing person investigations. There is no confirmed indication of voluntary departure. There is no documented preparation suggesting he intended to leave permanently. There were no unusual financial transactions in the days following his disappearance. No activity on his bank accounts that would suggest travel or relocation. No communication after the final phone call. At the same time, there is no confirmed forensic evidence establishing homicide. There is no located crime scene, no recovered weapon, no blood evidence publicly linked to a violent act. Without remains, the physical cause of disappearance cannot be medically determined. Investigators have operated within those constraints for more than a decade. As agricultural seasons have passed, the land near Taunton has changed repeatedly. Crops have grown and been harvested. Snow has covered and receded from fields. Ditches have filled and emptied. The environment itself has evolved, but it has not revealed definitive answers. The vehicle in the ditch remains the last confirmed physical anchor in the case. From that point forward, the record becomes less concrete. A walking path is inferred from the phone conversation, but not confirmed through physical evidence. A final moment is recorded in memory. Oh shit, but not visually documented. The technology available in 2008 preserved the call, but not the precise coordinates of his last step. Today, the case remains officially categorized as an open cold case. There has been no formal closure. Law enforcement agencies maintain the file. Missing person listings remain active. Periodic reviews continue. What endures is the framework of facts. A 19-year-old college student, a rural Minnesota road, a car in a ditch near Taunton, a prolonged phone call with his father, an abrupt final exclamation, and silence. There is no concluding discovery to describe, no recovered remains to mark the end of the timeline, no confirmed explanation entered into court records. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson remains unresolved, and the questions that began in the early morning hours of May 14, 2008 remain open.